Hi, I'm Priyanka Runwal. I'm an associate editor at Chemical and Engineering News. I am from India, but I'm a reporter based in New York, and I report on communities that are impacted by toxic pollutants, as well as those who may be left behind when there are scientific advances. So I work for an outlet called Chemical and Engineering News. We're both a magazine and a digital outlet. Uh, Mostly I write long form print stories as well as digital stories. And a lot of my work is based on reporting from the ground and trying to understand how vulnerable communities are impacted by toxic pollutants when there's an environmental disaster or there may be a lot of pollution in a certain area, and how communities who are living nearby or in these areas are being affected. I'm an environment and health reporter, but my training is in science. So I'm largely a science, environment, and health reporter. Sure. So yesterday at the World Conference of Science Journalists, me and other reporters led a panel on when industry endangers ecosystems and public health. So I presented on how people, so communities who live near industries or some industries, how their health may be hampered by potentially a lot of pollution or an environmental disaster that happens in that area. So yesterday at the panel, I presented two examples. One from a train that derailed in East Palestine, Ohio, in the U.S. in 2003, and 2023, sorry. And then when that train derailed, there were a few chemicals and dangerous chemicals that spilled. There were also a certain chemical, vinyl chloride, that is used to make plastics, was burned. And there were a lot of concerns about um, respiratory problems, about potential cancers down the road. And I wrote a lot about how, in the long term, people what is their health like? Are they displaced because of the environmental disaster? One of the people that I talked about in my presentation yesterday was a woman called Chrissy Hilton, who I met after a year after the disaster. And she was still living in a rental house, not in her home that she had lived for more than 40 years. And the train derailment and the chemical spills basically displaced her and her entire family for a year. And her house, when we went into her old home, we could still smell like a very strange, musty smell. And Chrissy had told me that when she still goes into the home, she feels heaviness in the chest, her eyes still burn. And when I was in that room, I got a headache. So just trying to understand from people who live there how they're being impacted, talking with scientists who are conducting long-term research and trying to understand how the health of the community has been impacted by the disaster and what is changing really in their health. Um, the other example I gave was from my home country in India, where in 1984, the world's worst industrial disaster took place. Basically, Union Carbide that set up a plant to make pesticides. There was a leak. Um, Dangerous gases such as methyl isocyanate and a few other gases leaked out into a dense settlement that lived nearby. A lot of the people are people from marginalized minority communities, and they were hugely affected by this disaster. Tens of thousands of people died, and many are still 40 years later still facing chronic health conditions. The risk of cancer in this community, especially among men who were in the womb of people who were pregnant at the time, faced 27 times higher risks of cancer. Um, a nonprofit that follows the long-term health of people have noticed that there are higher rates of kidney disease and other chronic diseases in that area. So at the end of the session, me and other reporters provided some tips for doing this sort of journalism. And one of my takeaways for the audience, and something that I'm trying to do in my own reporting, is to start thinking about collecting your own data when you don't have um, documents, reports, or hardcore data available to be able to make sense of the level of pollution people are facing. So that's the key.